Human noticed the alien girl misread his pulse and declared him a threat to their gene line. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main character. Jake Wilson had always been the type to keep his emotions in check, even in the most intense situations. As a technician working on a remote research station on the outskirts of the galaxy, he'd gotten used to the quiet isolation. The only company he had were his fellow crew members, and, occasionally, the alien visitors who came through the station on diplomatic missions. But today was different. He had been tasked with repairing a malfunctioning communication array, a job that should have been routine. However, as he worked in the station's lower levels, he noticed something that caught his attention. A soft, almost melodic hum echoed through the hallways, unlike anything he'd ever heard. Curiosity piqued, he followed the sound to its source. What he found wasn't what he expected. Standing in the hallway was an alien girl, taller than most humans, with smooth, teal-colored skin and eyes that shimmered with an otherworldly glow. Her name, he would later learn, was Lyra. She was part of the delegation from the nearby star system, visiting to discuss new trade routes. But what really struck Jake wasn't her appearance, but the way she was looking at him. Her eyes were fixated on him, studying him in a way that made him feel uncomfortable. Her gaze seemed to linger a little too long, and when their eyes met, Jake felt a strange, involuntary flutter in his chest. His heart rate increased, a little more than it should have. He quickly tried to shake it off, assuming it was just the nerves from the encounter. But then, without warning, Lyra spoke. "Your pulse," she began, her voice smooth and confident. "It's erratic." Jake froze. He had never been the type to reveal his emotions easily, especially in front of someone he didn't know. But the way she looked at him, the way she seemed to analyze every detail, made him feel exposed. "It's nothing," he said, trying to sound calm. "Just a little too much coffee this morning, probably." But Lyra wasn't convinced. Her expression hardened, and she stepped closer, almost as if she was drawn to him. Her eyes flicked to his chest, her gaze calculating. "No," she said firmly. "This is not just nervousness or excitement. This is something different." Her tone grew colder, and the air between them seemed to thicken with an unspoken tension. "Your pulse indicates a threat." Jake blinked, confused and slightly alarmed. "A threat? To whom?" He had no idea what she meant, but the intensity of her gaze made him second-guess everything. "What do you mean, a threat?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "To whose gene line?" Lyra's expression was unreadable, and for a moment, there was a heavy silence between them. She tilted her head slightly, studying him, as if trying to figure out what to say next. Then, in a voice that was almost too quiet to hear, she spoke again. "Humanity. You are a threat to our gene line." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He was no expert in alien biology, but he knew enough to understand that such a statement wasn't something to take lightly. The situation was escalating, and for the first time in his life, Jake felt entirely out of his depth. Lyra's words hung in the air, and the implications of what she had said were starting to sink in. What had he done to make her see him as a threat? Was it just his pulse? Or was it something more? He didn't have the answers, but one thing was certain: this was no longer just a simple repair job. Whatever was happening, it was going to change everything. As Lyra continued to stand there, her eyes still locked on him, Jake realized that he had just stepped into something much bigger than he could have ever imagined. Jake stood frozen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Lyra's words echoed in his mind, each one a little more impossible than the last. A threat to our gene line. He had no idea what that meant, but the way her eyes studied him, with a mix of calculation and confusion, left him uneasy. His pulse, which he had always been able to control, now seemed like an enemy he couldn't fight. It felt like she could read every beat, every little irregularity, and somehow, it made him feel vulnerable. "What do you mean by that?" Jake asked, his voice steadier than he felt. Lyra's expression softened, but the intensity in her eyes didn't fade. She stepped closer, almost in a trance, her gaze unwavering. "Your heart rate is irregular," she explained slowly, almost as if speaking to herself. "Humans are unpredictable, but your body reacts differently. It's not normal." Jake took a breath, trying to calm himself. "I'm just a little anxious, that's all," he said, though it sounded more like an excuse than a reason. Lyra tilted her head, her brow furrowing slightly. "Anxiety," she repeated, her voice laced with confusion. "No, this is something else. You're not reacting like a normal human." She took a step back, her mind clearly racing as she processed what she had just observed. Jake couldn't help but feel like he was being studied, scrutinized under a microscope. The air between them seemed thick, charged with an intensity that he couldn't explain. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to think of something to say, but the words escaped him. "I don't know what you're seeing, but I'm telling you, there's nothing to worry about," Jake finally said, forcing himself to sound confident. Lyra's eyes flickered briefly, a hint of uncertainty crossing her face before it hardened again. "You're lying." The words hit him like a shockwave, causing his heart to skip a beat. "I'm not lying," he shot back, his voice rising. "I'm telling you the truth. My pulse is just irregular. It happens sometimes." But Lyra wasn't convinced. "Your species, you're so different from us," she murmured, almost to herself. "You've made it this far, but now, your physiology, it's a danger to us. To our bloodline." Jake's mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "Danger? What are you talking about?" Lyra didn't respond immediately. Instead, she seemed to be lost in thought, her expression distant. After a long pause, she finally spoke again, but her voice was softer, almost hesitant. "I don't understand it fully, but your body. It's not just irregular. It's reacting to something. To me. Your pulse. It's like it's responding to something deep inside me." Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. "What are you saying?" he asked, barely above a whisper. "That I'm some kind of threat to you?" Lyra didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped back, her eyes still locked on him, as if trying to make sense of her own feelings. The tension in the room was palpable, thick with confusion, curiosity, and a hint of fear. Jake didn't know what to think. He had always been good at reading situations, but this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. He was suddenly aware of the space between them, the way her eyes never left his, the way she seemed to sense something in him that he couldn't even comprehend. He felt exposed, like his very existence was being questioned in ways he couldn't begin to understand. "Lyra," he said, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. "Please, just tell me what's going on. I don't know what you're sensing, but I'm not a threat to you. I swear it." There was a long silence before she spoke again, her voice barely audible. "I need to understand what's happening. Why your pulse reacts like this." Her eyes softened, but the confusion remained. "You need to leave. You need to leave before it's too late," she added, her voice trembling slightly. Jake didn't know what to say. His mind was racing, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never felt so lost, so out of control. But Lyra was right about one thing, something was happening here, something beyond his understanding. Whatever it was, it had just begun. He wasn't sure where it would lead, but he knew one thing for certain, his life was about to change, and the strange, alien girl in front of him was at the center of it. Jake stood there for a long moment, staring at Lyra. Her words still echoed in his mind, but now, something in her expression had changed. The rigid suspicion had softened, replaced by a sort of quiet introspection. She wasn't looking at him with fear anymore, now, there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, uncertainty, curiosity, maybe even confusion. It wasn't what Jake had expected. He had thought that the conversation, the tension, would only escalate, but now, it felt like they were on the edge of something far more complex. Slowly, Jake took a step forward, trying to bridge the silence that had fallen between them. Lyra, he said, his voice softer now, almost uncertain. I don't know what you're feeling, but I don't want to be a threat to you or anyone. I'm just trying to understand what's going on. She didn't respond right away, but her eyes lingered on him, and for a moment, Jake wondered if she was deciding whether or not to trust him. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but low. I don't understand your species, she confessed. You humans, you're unpredictable, but this. She gestured toward him with a delicate hand, as if trying to make sense of his very presence. This. I've never felt anything like it before. Your body, it reacts to mine, but not in a way that makes sense. Jake frowned slightly, trying to make sense of her words. What does that mean? He asked, his heart racing again. You're reacting to me? Lyra's gaze dropped briefly, as if considering how to explain. Your pulse, she said slowly, it's not just erratic. It's responding to my pheromones. But it's not just that. It's almost like. She trailed off, her mind seemingly struggling to find the words. Like what? Jake pressed, the urgency in his voice betraying his calm facade. Like you're drawn to me, she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of what they implied. Jake blinked, his breath catching. He had never considered that possibility, but the way Lyra spoke, so matter-of-fact, so unguarded, made it feel more real than he was ready to admit. He swallowed hard, feeling a mix of confusion and something else, something he couldn't quite name. I'm not. He began, but the words caught in his throat. What was he supposed to say to that? Was she suggesting that his body's reaction to hers wasn't just a mistake or a byproduct of his nervousness? I'm not trying to do anything, he said finally, his voice strained. I don't know what's happening, but I swear, I'm not a threat to you. I just want to understand. Lyra nodded slowly, her expression shifting once more, but this time, it softened, as if the weight of her own confusion had made her more vulnerable. I can't make sense of it either, she admitted. But something is happening. Something I don't understand. Jake's mind was racing, but he couldn't deny the strange pull. He felt toward her, a pull he hadn't been able to shake since they first met. It wasn't just physical, it was deeper, more primal. And now, Lyra was feeling it too. He stepped closer, but this time, it wasn't out of impulse, it was a deliberate attempt to bridge the divide between them. Maybe, Jake said quietly, maybe we're both just trying to figure this out. But we have to do it together. We have to figure out what's happening, before it's too late. Lyra hesitated for a moment, and then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. The space between them felt different now, no longer just full of tension, but also something else, an unspoken understanding, a mutual curiosity. And in that moment, Jake knew that whatever this was, it was only the beginning. Jake and Lyra stood in silence for a few moments, the weight of their unspoken thoughts hanging heavily between them. The air felt different now, charged with something neither of them fully understood. As Jake tried to process everything that had happened, he couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in Lyra's behavior. Her earlier wariness had faded, replaced by a deep curiosity. Her eyes, which had once been calculating, now seemed softer, almost searching. He knew she was still trying to make sense of it all, just as he was. So, Jake said, breaking the silence, his voice quiet but steady. What do we do now? Lyra looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. We need to understand why this is happening, she said slowly. Why your body reacts the way it does. Jake nodded. I agree. But how do we figure it out? I'm no expert in alien biology. Lyra gave him a small smile. I don't have all the answers either, she admitted. But I think we can start by exploring this connection. See what happens when we spend more time together. Jake felt a flicker of hesitation, but it was quickly replaced by determination. He wasn't sure where this would lead, but one thing was clear, he wasn't about to turn away from it now. Okay, he said, meeting her gaze. Let's figure this out. Over the next few days, Jake and Lyra spent more time together, trying to understand the strange connection between them. They talked, worked side by side, and observed each other's reactions. With every passing hour, the tension between them seemed to lessen, replaced by something far more complex. Jake noticed that when he was near her, his heart rate seemed to increase, but it wasn't out of fear or anxiety. It was something else. A pull. A draw he couldn't quite explain. And to his surprise, he found that Lyra's pulse did the same thing, responding to his presence. At first, they both tried to brush it off as coincidence. But the more they observed, the more they realized it wasn't just a random occurrence. It was something deeper, something biological that neither of them could deny. As the days passed, the connection between them grew stronger. Jake found himself looking forward to their time together, and Lyra's presence, once unsettling, now felt comforting. They began to share more than just the surface-level observations. They spoke about their fears, their hopes, and the strange, uncharted territory they were both venturing into. One evening, as they sat together in the dim light of the research station, Lyra spoke quietly, almost hesitantly. "Jake," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I've been thinking about what this means." Jake turned to face her, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do you mean?" Lyra paused, as if carefully considering her words. "I mean, this connection. The way our bodies respond to each other. It's more than just biology. It's..." She trailed off, her eyes searching his. "It's like we're connected. Like something in us is meant to be together." Jake felt a rush of warmth spread through him at her words. It was as if the air between them had shifted, suddenly filled with possibility. He couldn't explain it, but he knew what she meant. There was something undeniable between them, something that felt right, even if he didn't fully understand it. "I feel it too," Jake said, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what it is, but it's there. And I can't ignore it." Lyra looked down at her hands, her fingers lightly tracing the surface of the table. "I've never felt this way before," she said quietly. "Not with anyone. Not even with my own kind." Jake's heart clenched. He reached out, gently placing his hand over hers. "Then maybe it's time we stop questioning it," he said softly. "Maybe it's time we accept that whatever this is, it's real." Lyra looked up at him, her eyes meeting his. With an intensity that took his breath away. For the first time since they met, she smiled, truly smiled, and it was a smile that filled Jake with warmth. In that moment, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. And for the first time, the uncertainty that had surrounded them seemed less daunting. It was still there, but now, it felt like a challenge they could overcome. The strange, inexplicable connection between them had become the thread that bound them together. And Jake was ready to follow it wherever it would lead. Jake sat across from Lyra, the soft hum of the research station filling the silence between them. It had been several days since they had acknowledged the strange bond between them, and each moment since then seemed to add weight to what they were slowly realizing. There was something undeniable between them, something that defied explanation. And while neither of them had the words to fully understand it, they were learning to embrace it. Jake had always been the type to keep his emotions in check, to remain in control of any situation. But now, sitting across from Lyra, he felt a vulnerability he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't fear, though, it was a mix of curiosity and something else. He didn't want to call it hope, but that was the closest word he could find. "How are you feeling?" Jake asked softly, breaking the quiet. Lyra looked up, her deep blue eyes meeting his with an intensity that always seemed to make his heart beat a little faster. "Confused," she admitted, her voice low. "But also, I don't know. I think I'm starting to understand." "Understand what?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra leaned forward slightly, her expression softening as she met his gaze. "This," she said, her voice full of meaning. "This connection. It's not just something physical. It's deeper than that. I think we're more connected than we realize." Jake nodded slowly, his mind racing. He had felt it too, the pull, the strange connection that had only grown stronger the more they spent time together. It wasn't just about their bodies reacting to one another. It was something that felt almost fated. But the implications were still unclear. "But why?" he asked, the question lingering in the air. Why is this happening now? Why me? Lyra took a deep breath, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the table as she thought. I don't know, she said quietly. But I think, maybe it has something to do with our species. Humans are so different from us. Your physiology, your heart, your reactions, they're unpredictable. It's like you're not bound by the same rules we are. So, you think this is about my species? Jake asked, still trying to wrap his mind around the idea. Maybe, Lyra said, her voice thoughtful. But it's more than just that. You're not like the others. There's something about you, about the way you think, the way you react. You're. She paused, searching for the right word. You're not like the others. Jake felt a strange sense of pride at her words, though it was quickly replaced by confusion. I'm still not sure what that means. But I do know one thing, he said, his voice firm. I don't want to be a threat to you. To your people. Whatever this is, I want to understand it. Lyra smiled then, a small, genuine smile that lit up her face. I know, she said softly. I don't think you're a threat. But I think we need to understand each other better. We need to figure out why this is happening. Together. Jake met her gaze, his heart racing in his chest. It wasn't just curiosity that fueled him now, it was something deeper. Something that told him, without a doubt, that he was meant to be here, meant to be part of this strange, unexplainable connection. Together, he echoed, the word feeling more real than he expected. They sat there for a long time, the weight of their shared understanding hanging between them. There were no answers yet, no clear direction. But in that moment, Jake knew that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. And for the first time in days, he felt a sense of peace. Not because the mystery was solved, but because, for the first time, he wasn't alone in it. Jake sat in the quiet room, the dim light of the research station casting soft shadows on the walls. Lyra was across from him, her gaze focused on a small device in her hand. It was a piece of equipment they had been working on together, a new prototype for communication between their species. The silence between them was comfortable now, no longer filled with the tension that had once existed. Over the past few days, they had come to understand each other in a way that felt almost natural, as though they had always been meant to share this space. Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder at how quickly things had changed. Not long ago, he had felt completely out of place, unsure of his place in this strange world of alien technology and unfamiliar customs. But now, sitting here with Lyra, it felt like the pieces were starting to fit together. You know, Jake said, breaking the silence, I've been thinking. Lyra looked up from the device, her eyes meeting his with that same intensity he had come to know so well. About what? She asked, her voice gentle but curious. About us, Jake said, his voice quiet. About this connection. I never thought I'd be here, in a place like this, doing something like this. Lyra tilted her head slightly, her expression thoughtful. You mean with me? Jake nodded. Yeah. I never imagined anything like this would happen. I thought I'd be back on Earth by now, doing the same old thing. But now, I'm here, with you. Lyra's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, Jake thought he saw a flicker of something deeper in her gaze. I understand, she said softly. I never imagined this either. But here we are, and we have to figure it out, don't we? Jake took a deep breath, trying to steady the rush of emotions that had been building inside him. Yeah. We do. They both fell silent for a moment, the weight of their words hanging in the air. It wasn't just about the connection anymore. It was about everything, the strange feelings they both had, the way their bodies reacted to each other, the way they had come to trust one another. It was a bond that neither of them fully understood, but it was there, undeniable and real. Finally, Jake spoke again, his voice steady but laced with a hint of uncertainty. So, what happens now? Do we just keep going like this? Keep working together, whatever this is? Lyra looked at him, her gaze never wavering. I think, she said slowly, we keep going. We keep learning. And maybe, over time, we'll understand it. But for now, we're here. And that's enough. Jake felt a sense of relief wash over him, as though a weight had been lifted. He didn't have all the answers, and neither did Lyra. But they were in this together, and that was something they could work with. "All right," he said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Let's keep going, then." Lyra smiled back, her expression soft and sincere. "We will," she said, her voice filled with quiet confidence. As the silence returned, the two of them sat side by side, not needing words to communicate anymore. There was a comfort in their presence, a sense of peace that neither of them had expected but both had come to appreciate. They didn't know where this would lead, but for the first time in a long while, they were both okay with that. Together, they were ready to face whatever came next, knowing that, whatever happened, they wouldn't have to face it alone. Jake and Lyra sat in the quiet room, the weight of their conversation still lingering between them. The days had passed quickly since their first real acknowledgement of the bond they shared, and with each passing hour, the pull between them only seemed to grow stronger. Despite their efforts to focus on their work, there was no denying the undercurrent of something more, something that neither of them could completely define. But for now, they chose to simply exist in the moment, allowing the connection to unfold naturally. Jake was the first to speak, his voice breaking the comfortable silence. "Lyra," he began, his words slow but deliberate. "What if this connection is more than just biology? What if it's something deeper than we even realize?" Lyra looked up at him, her violet eyes meeting his with a gaze that held both curiosity and something more, an understanding that transcended words. "Maybe it is," she said quietly. "Maybe it's something we don't fully understand yet. But I think we should explore it. Together." Jake felt a small smile tug at the corner of his lips. There was something about Lyra's confidence, her quiet certainty, that made him feel like they were on the brink of something important, something that could change everything. "I agree," he said, his voice steady. "But how do we start? What do we do next?" Lyra stood up from her seat, her movements fluid and graceful. She walked over to a nearby console, her fingers brushing over the controls as she accessed the station's data. "I think we need to understand more about the physiological connection," she said, her voice thoughtful. "If we can identify what's causing this, maybe we can figure out how to control it, or even strengthen it." Jake nodded, following her lead. "That makes sense. We need to get to the bottom of this. But I also think we need to trust what we're feeling. This might not be something we can fully explain, but that doesn't mean it's not real." Lyra turned to face him, her expression softening. "I agree," she said, her voice gentle. "But there's something else I've been thinking about." Jake raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What's that?" Lyra hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her words carefully. "I've been wondering if this connection could be something more. Not just about biology or physiology, but about who we are, as individuals. Maybe it's about the way we complement each other." Jake felt his heart skip a beat. The idea struck him harder than he had anticipated. "You mean like, fate?" Lyra nodded slowly, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just that we're both searching for something we didn't know we needed until we met each other." The words hung in the air between them, their weight heavier than Jake had expected. Could it be true? Was this connection between them more than just an accident of circumstance? Jake didn't have the answers, but something about Lyra's presence, her calm certainty, made him believe that there was something bigger at play here. He stood up, walking over to her, his mind racing with the possibilities. "So, what do we do now?" he asked again, this time with more conviction in his voice. Lyra's smile widened, and she placed a hand on his arm, her touch light but reassuring. "Now, we explore," she said softly. "We take this one step at a time, and we see where it leads. Together." As the two of them stood there, the quiet hum of the station surrounding them, Jake realized that this moment, this strange, uncharted connection, was just the beginning of something far bigger than he could have imagined. And for the first time in a long while, he felt truly at peace with that uncertainty. Whatever came next, he knew he wouldn't be facing it alone. Together, they would figure it out, no matter what. They would find the answers, or at least, learn to live with the questions, one step at a time. Jake and Lyra spent the following weeks working side by side, each day bringing them closer to understanding the strange connection that seemed to grow stronger with every passing moment. They had set aside their doubts, focusing instead on the bond between them, whatever it was. The research station had become more than just a place of work, it had become their shared space, their sanctuary. There were no more questions about the why of their connection, only curiosity about the how. What began as an odd, unexplainable phenomenon had slowly turned into a quiet, unspoken understanding between them. It was more than just the physical reactions they had both observed, it was a deeper, quieter sense that they were both tethered to something far bigger than either of them could comprehend. But despite their growing understanding, there was still much they didn't know. They had come to the conclusion that their physiological connection was not the only thing at play. There was an emotional bond too, one that, as time went on, became harder to ignore. One evening, as the two of them sat together in the control room, surrounded by screens filled with data and information, Jake looked at Lyra, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about what happens after all this?" he asked, his voice low. Lyra glanced at him, her violet eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. "What do you mean?" she replied, her voice soft but curious. "I mean..." Jake hesitated, trying to find the right words. "What happens when we figure it all out? When we understand this connection completely?" Lyra was silent for a moment, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the console. It wasn't a question either of them had truly considered until now. "I think," she said slowly, "that it doesn't end with understanding. Maybe it's just the beginning." Jake felt a flutter in his chest at her words. "The beginning of what?" Lyra turned toward him fully now, her gaze steady. "The beginning of whatever comes next. I don't think we can control it, Jake. I think we just have to let it guide us, and see where it leads." Jake let out a quiet breath, his thoughts swirling. He had always been someone who preferred to have everything planned out, who liked to know the next steps before taking them. But now, with Lyra, everything felt different. "You're right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can't control it. But maybe that's okay." Lyra gave him a soft smile, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite name. "Maybe it is," she agreed. For the first time in a long while, Jake felt a sense of peace settle over him. The uncertainty that had once been so overwhelming now felt like a challenge they could face together, one step at a time. It wasn't about finding answers right away, it was about moving forward, about exploring the unknown, with Lyra by his side. As the evening wore on, the two of them sat in comfortable silence, their minds at ease. The strange connection between them had become less of a mystery and more of a truth they were both ready to embrace. Whatever came next, they would face it together, ready for whatever the future held. Jake and Lyra had settled into a routine that, although strange, felt comfortable. The uncertainty they had once faced had given way to a kind of mutual understanding, and each day seemed to bring them closer, not just as colleagues, but as two individuals connected in a way neither of them could explain. It was early in the morning when Lyra approached him with a new idea, her voice carrying the quiet confidence she had come to trust over the last few weeks. "Jake, I think we need to go beyond the physical connection," she said, her tone more serious than usual. "What do you mean?" Jake asked, looking up from the console he had been working on. Lyra's eyes were focused, filled with the same determination she had shown ever since they started exploring the bond between them. "I've been thinking," she continued, "maybe there's more to this than just what happens when we're near each other. Maybe it's not just our bodies reacting, but our minds, our emotions." Jake furrowed his brow, trying to process what she was saying. "So, you're saying our connection isn't just physical? It's emotional, too?" Lyra nodded. "Exactly. I think it's more than just our biology. It's something deeper, something we've been ignoring." She paused. For a moment, searching his face for a sign that he understood. "I think we need to see what happens when we truly open ourselves up to this connection. To each other." Jake stood up from his seat, turning to face her fully. There was a flicker of hesitation in his chest, but it was quickly replaced by curiosity. "You're right," he said, his voice steady. We've been focusing so much on what we can't explain, but maybe it's time to see what happens when we let ourselves feel it fully. Lyra smiled softly, the warmth in her expression filling the room. That's what I was hoping you'd say. They both stood in the quiet room, their gazes meeting as they shared an unspoken understanding. There was no more need for words to describe what had become so clear between them. It wasn't just a scientific phenomenon they were exploring anymore. It was something real, something powerful. Lyra stepped closer, her presence calming and steady, as if the very air around her was charged with a quiet force. Jake felt his heart race, but this time, it wasn't with confusion or fear. It was with something different, something that felt like trust. So, what do we do now? Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra reached out, gently placing her hand over his. We let it guide us, she said, her voice soft but sure. We embrace it. As she spoke those words, Jake felt a shift inside him, a feeling that he had been waiting for without even knowing it. He had always been someone who looked for control, for answers. But here, with Lyra, in this strange, unpredictable moment, he realized that maybe the best thing they could do was let go. Let the connection guide them, wherever it might lead. And for the first time in his life, Jake felt a sense of freedom. Freedom not from the constraints of his past, but from the need to understand everything. It was enough to just be here, in this moment, with her. As Lyra's hand stayed on his, the weight of everything that had brought them together, the confusion, the doubts, the growing feelings seemed to melt away. It didn't matter that they didn't have all the answers. What mattered was that they were together, and they would face whatever came next, side by side.